Yeah, this is a nice follow-up to Monty's beautiful illustration of the urbanization process as it happened in France. So I'm jumping way back and trying to explore the early origins of this urbanization process. Thanks to Professor Greenspoon and the Symposium organizers for putting together such a wonderful event. The focus on this topic is tied to my own personal interest in agriculture and farming. In my spare time outside of academia, I turned my backyard into a small farm, despite the plea of my kids to leave some space for play. I told them, farming is everything. It enriches your life, makes you feel accomplished, being connected to the source of your food, learning life lessons from seeds, getting your hands dirty. When you eat that winter squash on the table, there's a story behind it of sweat, struggle, fighting aphids and slugs. And those grapes, look how beautiful those grapes are. And you know what they said? Where's the trampoline going to go? Part of my courses at Grand Valley, I teach on the history of the land of Israel, the founding of the modern state, the crucial role of the early agricultural collectives from the late 1880s up to 1948 into the present day, the kibbutz, the moshav, and the intentional organization of these communities for survival in arid climates. But it struck me that despite the deep memory of land and agrarian thinking in Jewish consciousness, these farming communities are relatively recent phenomena. Agricultural metaphors and themes permeate the Bible, early Judaism, later Tanaitic literature. Josephus, our first century priest turned historian, famously said, "Ours is not a maritime country, neither commerce nor intercourse which it promotes with the outside world has any attraction for us. Our cities are built inland, remote from the sea, and we devote ourselves to the cultivation of the productive country." Even 200 years before Josephus, we have an outsider impression of Jews as farmers. A letter from the Seleucid king Antiochus III to his subjects notes that Jews in Mesopotamia had long been farmers, referring to the exiles who opted to stay in Babylon instead of returning with Ezra and Nehemiah. The very structure of the Mishnah, its 6 orders, reflects a profoundly intimate knowledge of farming and agricultural concerns. Yet, it is nonetheless a startling observation that for most of Jewish history, especially medieval and modern eras, Jews have become characteristically an urban people. The occasion of this symposium, Jews in Urban Life, offers an opportunity to reflect on this question further. How did the dramatic occupational transformation from farmers to moneylenders, merchants, realtors, booksellers, agents and brokers, makers of water clocks, innkeepers, tanners, glass manufacturers, artisans, ship owners, pearl dealers, goldsmiths, coin minters, financiers, core bankers, physicians, and long-distance traders happen? We know about most of these positions from the documentary record of the Cairo Geniza, Gaonic Responsa, as well as reports of geographers and travelers, such as Benjamin Tudela. And the documents of the Geniza cover about 450 occupations, including about 265 manual labor occupations, such as crafts, 90 occupations related to commerce and banking, and about another 90 bureaucratic or teaching professions, including scribes, state and local bureaucrats and officials, religious functionaries, teachers, rabbis, and educators. Scholars have long debated the extent to which this transition from farming to urban life was driven by internal or external factors. Can we detect any one cause, directly or indirectly, or was it the result of a long, indiscrete process? No doubt, the steady domination of Roman occupation slowly chipped away at Jewish independence. In 60, Pompey relieved the Maccabean dynasty of its political autonomy. In 6, Judea became an official province. The Jewish-Roman War from 66 to 73 ended with the desolation of Jerusalem. And following Bar Kokhba, 132, In 136, Hadrian dealt a final blow, severing the last link between the Jews and the land, making it illegal to be Jewish in Judea. Where does the story go from here? Theories can be divided into two main categories: those that highlight external factors such as restrictions, discrimination, persecution, and massacres, and those that emphasize endogenous choice, voluntary self-segregation because of religious rules, or voluntary migration to urban areas to preserve group identity. The most widespread and common explanation is that external or exogenous events, so-called accidents of history, compel Jews to choose urban occupations. Israel Abrahams, for example, stated that when the medieval Jews devoted themselves largely to commerce and money lending, they were not obeying a natural taste nor a special instinct, but were led to these pursuits by the force of the circumstances, by exclusive laws, and by the express desire of kings and people. In 1938, Cecil Roth stated that the Jew was driven by the unfortunate circumstances of his history to be predominantly a townsman. He had to seek an outlet despairingly in every branch of the urban economy. Other scholars of the 20th century were uncomfortable with the seeming lack of agency attributed to Jews in deciding their own fate. So scholars began to explore alternative theories. Could this occupational transition be the result of voluntary self-selection into skilled professions? What requisite conditions need to be met for this to happen? Max Weber made recourse to halakhic considerations. He proposed that Jews voluntarily chose to segregate to become an urban population in order to maintain their ritualistic correctness, dietary prescriptions, and Sabbath rules, which would have been impossible to follow in rural areas. Other theories with varying degrees of plausibility attempt to establish the premise that because Jews faced regular dispersions and persecutions, they intuitively began to invest in portable human capital rather than fixed assets like land. Sambar, Brenner, Kiefer, and Susskind. In the 2007 study, Kenneth Stowe opted for more of a middle ground. He supposes that land restrictions were not the cause of Jews entering trade and money lending, but he concedes that such restrictions put them at a disadvantage from profitably engaging in agriculture because they couldn't compete with Christian farmers once the Byzantine Empire grew into its full stride. The most recent comprehensive attempt to explain this occupational transformation comes from a series of journal articles by Botticini and Eckstein, which culminated in their 2012 book, The Chosen Few, How Education Shaped Jewish History, from 70 to 1492. They begin by describing the historical contours of the transformation of Jews from farmers to merchants. Almost all Jews worked in agriculture during the 6 centuries between Jesus and Muhammad. I'm quoting. In cities such as Alexandria, Babylon, Jerusalem, and Rome, Jews were engaged in a wide variety of crafts and trade, but most Jews and non-Jews everywhere earned their living as farmers, sharecroppers, tenants, or agricultural laborers. Today, the overwhelming majority of the world's Jews earn their living from trade, banking, finance, high-tech industries, medicine, law, academia, and a wide array of other skills and high-income professions. Their argument draws on both internal and external factors, as well as economic models of opportunity cost and patient selection when it came to cashing in on a key transferable skill embedded in Jewish culture, namely the high premium on literacy through reading and studying the Torah. They describe how cultural and religious values prime Jews to succeed in a range of more specialized skilled work that depended on literacy, including mathematical calculation and contract enforcing institutions. This development, internal to Judaism, merged with an exogenous event, namely the mass urbanization of the Middle East during the Abbasid dynasty, beginning around 750, to make the occupational transition irreversible. The population booms in Baghdad, Basra, Kufa, Cairo, Samarra, Isfahan required parallel development in skilled trades and mercantile professions for which Jews were uniquely prepared. They state, quote, "The direction of causality thus runs from investment in literacy and human capital to voluntarily giving up investing in land and being farmers, to entering urban occupations to become mobile and migrating, not the other way around." This occupational transition occurred first in Mesopotamia and Persia under Muslim rule during the 8th and 9th centuries before spreading to all other locations where Jews lived. In proving their point, however, they go too far in downplaying the very real economic disadvantages Jews faced. On some level, this must be taken into account in any serious reconstruction of this occupational transition. For example, Bottini and Eckstein claim that no significant restrictions on Jewish economic activities existed in Roman, Byzantine, or Persian empires. Again, I quote, "The transition was not precipitated by legal codes, which placed almost no restrictions on economic activities of the Jewish population. Jews could own land, employ slaves, and engage in farming or any other occupation except civil service." It's true that after the two Jewish wars, many lands were confiscated, but some land holdings were retained and Jews kept working as farmers. We do have instances of continued farming, certainly, as noted by Safrai and Aviona and others. But to say that there were no real restrictions on economic activity obscures the facts of Jewish daily life. Bottini and Eckstein give a stark portrayal of Byzantine Palestine as one of overall degeneration and decline. And this helps them push the transition to urban life during the Abbasid urbanization program. But archaeological record shows that overall, under Christian rule, especially with the effort to transform the Holy Land into a Christian pilgrimage site, Jerusalem and its environs at least tripled in population, by some estimates quadrupled, from the influx of private and public capital. This is true especially in the Negev, with its intensive agricultural complexes and hundreds of farmhouses that emerged during the Byzantine era to support the population boom. The late Iskar Hirschfeld showed how Byzantine activities in the Negev were unprecedented in scale and did not recur in the region until the modern era, representing human achievement, drawing on ingenuity and technological solutions in a challenging environment. The evidence includes widespread construction of agricultural terraces and dams for collecting flood waters and alluvium, and also dovecotes, columbaria, built near fields to capture the fertilizer from doves, enriching the nutrient-poor desert soil. Jerusalem also flourished with pilgrims from as far as Europe, Arabia, Mesopotamia, and India. Notably, the wife of Theodosius II, Eudocia, moved to Jerusalem in 444, which sparked a rebuilding project, and she also allowed Jews and Samaritans to return to the city. Jews also participated in these newly urbanized industries. They served as guides for pilgrims. With their deep familiarity of biblical sites and other parts of the commerce and travel economies. But yet, on the whole, prosperity of Jewish villages seem to lag in respect to their Christian counterparts. It's difficult to argue that this would be the result of anything but the pejorative and restrictive law codes imposed on Jews during this time. What I'd like to do is briefly review the evidence of these restrictions, evidence that comes from a close reading of Codex Theodosianus, commissioned by Theodosius II and published around 439. It contains a compilation of earlier law codes from across the empire on all matters of administration, even such details as to how, if Jews bragged about working in the Byzantine administration, the Byzantine secret service, they would be demoted or barred from service. From these codes, we find that some rights are protected and some civil service opportunities are available, but they also suggest that Jews were kept in an almost unpredictable state of ambivalence about what they could and could not do. After reviewing the relevant codes, I'd like to reflect on how these might be understood in light of the archaeological record from comparative perspective of Byzantine, Christian, and Jewish farms. First, the ambivalence of Jewish life under the Byzantine law codes. These codes typically include the date they were decreed. I present them in chronological order to give a sense of both how official positions evolved regarding status of Jews and how deconstructing the situation that gave rise to the law supports the notion that violations of these laws regularly took place. Emperor Constantius, 337 to 61, issued a decree that prohibited Jews from owning and trading Christian slaves. While the institution of slavery is repugnant today, it was the basis of agriculture in the ancient world. The obvious connection here is that no slaves meant no laborers, which meant that farming without laborers could be done only on a subsistence level as a sustainable family operation, or perhaps even as a small-scale business, but this cannot be lucrative in any real sense. Code number 1691, year 336. If a Jew purchased a slave, Christian or otherwise, and had them circumcised, the slave would be taken from the Jew and given freedom. But by 339, 2 years later, circumcising his slaves was a capital punishment. In that same year, Code 1692 reports that decrees that Jewish ownership of Christian slaves is outlawed. Code 1689, year 393, it is sufficiently established that the sect of the Jews is forbidden by no law. Hence, we are gravely disturbed that their assemblies have been forbidden in certain places. Your sublime magnitude will, therefore, after receiving this order, restrain with proper severity the excesses of persons who, in the name of the Christian religion, presume to commit certain unlawful acts and attempt to destroy and despoil the synagogues. Code 12.1.158. This is a few years after that. It describes a decree that was issued in the Western provinces and makes public service compulsory for all people, regardless of religion. When the law exempting Jews from public service is brought to the emperor's attention in this particular code, he states that the law in the eastern part of the empire does not apply to the Western provinces. 16.8.21, year 412. No person shall be trampled upon when he is innocent, on the ground that he is a Jew, nor shall any religion cause any person to be exposed to contumely. Their synagogues and habitations shall not be burned indiscriminately, nor shall they be injured wrongfully without any reason. Code 16.8.22, year 415, outlaws building new synagogues and permits destruction of those abandoned in desert places. 16.8.24, year 418, bans Jews from entering imperial service. Code 16.8.25. We just have a few more of these. Year 423. Again, we find a repetition of the decree that in the future no synagogue at all shall be indiscriminately taken away from them or consumed by fire. And if this happens, they will be recompensed. At first glance, some of these codes sound like protective measures. But reading between the lines and drawing on what we know from other sources, this type of legislation suggests that synagogues were in fact destroyed at the hands of locals. A prominent example is the Christian Syrian monk Barsama, known for his attacks on synagogues and pagan temples and efforts to seek converts to Christianity. Year 415, Honorarius issues a surprising decree that Jews may own slaves if they permit them to practice Christianity, but 2 years later, we find this law is revised. A Jew, this is code 16.9.4, a Jew must not purchase a Christian slave or acquire one by title of gift. If anyone should fail to observe this regulation, he shall forfeit the ownership that he wantonly obtained, and the slave himself shall be given freedom as his reward if he should propose that he should voluntarily give information of what was done. But a Jew may possess in his own property all other slaves who are established as adherents of the true religion. even though he himself, an adherent of the nefarious superstition, if he appears to have already obtained them, or if he should hereafter acquire them under title of an inheritance or trust fund. We need to keep in mind, though, that if this rule was violated, capital punishment was the penalty. This makes Jewish ownership of slaves an extremely precarious venture. To this list, we can add the additional observation that under Emperor Arcadius, Jews were banned from converting to Christianity for economic motives, which suggests that the pressure to convert in order to make a livelihood was strong enough to become enshrined in law. These are the most relevant codes. Now, what does the economic situation look like from a survey of Jewish farms and villages? As a brief caveat, because of COVID travel restrictions, my fieldwork in Israel was cut short, so I rely here on a lot of survey excavation reports. My intention is to present this information in effort to open a more nuanced conversation about how this data might be understood as a piece of the Byzantine historical puzzle of the Jewish transition from farming to merchants. I start by mentioning sites in the north of Israel and proceed towards the west and south. I pay attention to distinct features such as churches, synagogues, and farmhouses, as well as the relative size of these villages. So in the Golan, excavations at Nahal Gotha uncovered a farmhouse with a courtyard, a farm plot, an animal pen or sheepfold, a rectangular dwelling with mosaic floors, walls of large stones, and a tower that, according to Shimon Dar, was used to store or process grains for wine. Here, I'll just kind of itemize these for the sake of time. Kfar Nafak in Galilee is another village estimated to cover an area of 3.4 hectares, which is about 8.5 acres. The village was originally consisted of farmhouses scattered over a slope. Katzrin, a spring-fed village excavated by Tzvi Maoz and Killebrew, revealed an impressive synagogue that shows signs of additions and renovations from the late 4th until the mid-8th century. There are several multi-room buildings adjacent to the synagogue that housed families who subsisted on farming olives, wine, grain, and herding. The overall area of the village is estimated to cover about 2 hectares, which is about 5 acres. Urbanizing, another spring-fed Jewish village, was excavated by Ze'ev Yevin and yielded a central synagogue with alleys leading from it in every direction. This village covered an area of about 3 hectares, 7.5 acres. Moving now to Western Galilee, excavations at Kirbet el-Kusir, just east of Akko, revealed a large farmhouse divided into a western and eastern complex. This seems to have functioned as both a monastery or church and farmstead. It also has 2 sophisticated oil presses and was likely the residence of a wealthy landowner. Shikmona is just south of Haifa along the seacoast, and excavations by Yosef Elgabish yielded intersecting streets, drainage channels, dwellings with colorful mosaic floors, and a rich assortment of imported objects. Its affluence was derived from the proximity along the coastal road. Villagers had access to commerce, industry, farming, and fishing. This is one of the largest Jewish sites, covering an estimated 5 hectares to about 12 acres. Chorvat Sumaka was a prosperous Jewish village from the 4th to 6th centuries, located on the Carmel mountain range. The synagogue stands at the center with dozens of installations for wine production on the northern end, and this village covers about 3 hectares, 7.5 acres. Ramat Hanadiv is several kilometers to the south. It's the site of what Hirschfeld considers to be one of the most beautiful farms in the country, and he calls it a local version of the Roman Villa Rustica, a well-to-do functional farmhouse, but not overly luxurious. Further down the coast, on the outskirts of Ashkelon, Yigal Yisrael excavated an industrial estate situated on the Via Maris. He uncovered a private bathhouse from which the overflow water was used to spawn fish in several ponds. He also found an olive press, 2 wine presses, storehouses, 5 kilns for potters' workshops. Hirschfeld remarks that the industrial state represents the large landowners who, according to the sources, accumulated property and had high social standing. Towards the east, moving now towards the Hebron area, we encounter Rejum al-Qasr, located about 8 kilometers northeast of Hebron. Here we find a farmhouse with a tower, which can be interpreted as a kind of fortified farm. Towers and farmhouses are characteristic of many sites in the Negev. Byzantine Tekoa was a large Christian village that stretched about 6 hectares. That's about 15 acres. It contained 2 churches, which were apparently built in honor of the renowned prophet Amos. There is a large basilica church at the northwestern end and a smaller one in the center. Kirbet Susia was a large Jewish village that covered about 6 hectares, 15 acres, the same size as Tekoa. In addition to water cisterns and storage caves, the site revealed a synagogue renovated during the 4th century and continued in use until the 8th century. While no farmhouses can be identified here, its size shows that it was relatively affluent, similar to the Jewish village of Shikmona near Haifa. And then in the Negev. Lastly, we consider from a bird's eye view what many refer to as the Great Research Laboratory of Byzantine world settlement, the Negev. The combination of security and unlimited land reserves made this a key area for Byzantine innovation and development. I take one example from the numerous sites. Nachal Yatir, which is about 15 kilometers east of Beersheba. Hirschfeld counts at Nachal Yatir 67 sites around the area that are grouped into 5 villages, 6 hamlets, which are clusters of farmhouses, 39 farmhouses, 15 field towers, and 2 monasteries. The existence of hamlets built as satellite units near villages and larger estates are a unique phenomenon that typify agricultural areas in the Negev. These are absent in northern Jewish villages. Many of the larger Christian villages feature several churches, bathhouses, which are additional signs of affluence. These types of estates had churches, monasteries, bathhouses, and farmhouses, representing the economic achievements that were derived from the economic superiority of Christian landowners, particularly through farming and processing agricultural produce. This comprises a complex infrastructure that apparently was unavailable to Jewish farmers. When we compare the size of Christian and Jewish villages, we find that in the north of Israel, where Jewish settlement is most highly concentrated, villages tend to be quite small, about 0.8 to 2 hectares, ranging from 2 to 5 acres. While villages in the south stretch over 8 to 10 hectares, about 20 acres. Furthermore, areas of Jewish settlement in eastern Galilee and the Golan do not contain hamlets or farmhouses. Hirschfeld comments that Jewish life revolved around its main communal institution, the synagogue, and this phenomenon implies a distinct social organization that dictated a different settlement pattern for the Jewish rural population in Byzantine Palestine. In contrast, there was abundance of hamlets and farmhouses in the areas settled by Christians in western Galilee, on the coastal plain, in the Judean hills, and in the Negev. While farmhouses like the ones at Nachal Gofta and Kfar Nafak in the north are typical of others found across the country, especially in the Negev, there's nothing to suggest that these were owned or inhabited by Jews. The fact that we find no large farmhouse complexes connected to Jewish villages means that Jewish farming in Byzantine Palestine was never able to upscale in the same way that Christian farms had in western Galilee, seashore plains, and the Negev. Hirschfeld summarizes his summary of farms and villages in Byzantine Palestine with the following comment. It is a matter of interest that, although many excavations and surveys were conducted in eastern Galilee and lower Golan, no sites have yet been found that can be identified as farmhouses or estate manors. The absence of such sites in areas inhabited mainly by the Jewish population is especially pronounced in light of the abundance of sites of this type found in other areas of the country. It appears that inhabitants of the Jewish villages continue to live in their villages despite the economic prosperity and the process of demographic growth that elsewhere had led to the establishment of farmhouses and smaller satellite villages. In conclusion, while Borricini and Eckstein do well to argue that the founding of the Muslim caliphates was a historical accident, that is, an exogenous event that's set in motion by Arabs under Muhammad's leadership, and that this historical accident interacted with the internal dynamics of Judaism to lead to an unprecedented and long-lasting change in the occupational and residential structure of world Jewry, they downplay the decisive and detrimental role of Byzantine legal structures that drastically limited the scale at which Jewish farms could operate. One way to refine our historical understanding of the remarkable entrance of Jews into skilled trade after many centuries of agricultural work is through cross-regional comparison. What happened in Mesopotamia was different from what happened in Byzantine Palestine. It's wise to caution causal links and theories that essentialize the evidence. The unique education and literacy of Jews no doubt played an important role in their success as merchants and moneylenders, but this line of reasoning should not be pressed to the neglect of the economic disadvantages that are clearly portrayed in the archaeological record of Jewish Byzantine farms and villages. Thank you.
The floor is now open for questions.
Yeah, Alan.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for that great talk, and really for that cautionary tale about making these overbold claims about X causing Y all over the place without any regard to chronology law. And I really appreciate that. I would say that in Babylonia, certainly the creation of a rabbinic class responsible, for the Babylonian Talmuds almost mandated places like Surah, Pumbedita, Mesivta, because you needed a certain amount of people gathered together to engage in the kind of back and forth that you see represented in the Talmudic literature. So I would say that's not to discount the widespread Jewish farming or Amei Haaretz in Babylonia, but clearly the creation of rabbinic literature is bound up with urbanization very intimately.
Yeah. Let's keep going.
Thank you, Anthony. That was really interesting. I appreciate that. Just thinking of the various factors to think about the differences between Jewish versus Christian settlements,
right.
Farms.
Yeah.
What about topography? I'm thinking that the Galilee, the Golan is very hilly. Yaakov Plain, particularly when you get to the Negev, wide open spaces.
Right.
Does that help to account for the kind of spread that one might find in Christian sites versus Jewish sites?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's a good observation because, too, in the north, a lot of these Jewish villages are restricted by topography. Even Kfar Nafak these farmhouses are struggling to stay on stable ground. They're falling down into the, I think I need to look a little more around, but it's connected to the phenomenon of settlements in the north and the large proportion of synagogues that are in the north. When you look at a map of synagogues, you see, if anyone hasn't seen a map of, it just illustrates this demographic area that Jews predominantly lived in the north. There's maybe a handful of synagogues central in the southern area. I think also it did take, for the Byzantines to develop the south, it took a certain amount of capital, a certain amount of innovation to really get water into those places and build these cisterns. So I don't know if the same resources would have been available to Jews at the time. Yeah, it's thank you.
Well, doesn't that also connect to the issue of the use of enslaved labor in order to develop this infrastructure for water direction containment and to work a larger area, you need more labor.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which would make, if it's prohibitive to have extra labor because you're Jewish, therefore also makes it economically prohibitive to try to venture south to have a larger estate.
Right.
And having a smaller estate in the south would not be as economically attractive or viable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
It's a really fascinating question. Thanks. The problem was always evidence for these things, because what we're really dealing with is a cantonized country. I'd be interested to know in places that are adjacent. So, for example, north of Deborah in the Golan Heights, which is Christian territory, as opposed to south of Deborah in the Golan Heights, which is Jewish territory, or west of Kfar Hanania and east of Kfar Hanania. In other words, adjacent territories for distinction. And my guess is that you're not going to find a lot, specifically because we're dealing with smaller plots, as opposed to the Negev, which is open territory. It's sort of like building kibbutzim in the Jezreel Valley, because who else would want to go there, right? But you hear my point.
Yeah.
The other test case would be Samaritans, who, which is my hobby horse, who did have a 6th century revolt against the Byzantines because they were treated even worse than the Jews.
Right.
And the implications, for example, in the area around Neapolis.
Yeah.
Right. You hear where I'm going with this. The last problem I have is how you deal with the Codex Theodosianus, because it's an empire-wide document, or an Eastern Empire-wide document, with collected materials from all over. And how much local impact that had in any particular place doesn't seem, at least from the synagogue example, seems to be an ambivalent sort of thing.
Right.
I'm just throwing all of these things out
Yeah.
as my usual problems with everything I do in my life.
Sure.
And I get to the point where I say, I don't know, and everyone says, but you have to, because we're medievalists or modernists.
Yeah.
And you and I have to say, but we don't.
Yeah.
But I think that the test cases would be adjacent areas.
Yeah, the canonization. Yeah, that's a good point. And also, yeah, it's difficult to know to what extent these law codes were enforced or enacted, and they often come several decades after supposed events that spark the need for them. So I don't necessarily see them in a prescriptive sense, or that they are applied. I wanted to, start thinking about this topic, just take a fresh look at some of these and see the kind of indications or impressions they give, and then compare that with the record.
Another place to look would be that there are a number of places where rabbis say, any place we take over, we don't give back. And in fact, we've had it since the time of Joshua, of the return from Babylonia, or from Joshua, depending upon where. That's a rhetoric of maintenance, really, rather than of expansion. So when you look at something like the Rehov inscriptions from the 5th and then the 6th century, you can see the cantonization up close. This is where agricultural law fits, and this is places where it doesn't.
Yeah.
Right? And so the Bet Shan Valley is another good place to see this, I think.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. It's a lot of good things to go on.
The time has come to thank Anthony one more time